the Limoges-Paris night train. It barrels through the Loire Valley of France at 100 miles an hour. And usually blows past the small town of Chabanais, about 180 miles south of Paris. Few tourists visit this tranquil village. But one night, murder comes to call. In October 1999, a man walking by the railroad tracks makes a shocking discovery. The partially clothed body of a young woman. French gendarmes from nearby Bourges respond. They confront a disturbing sight.
It was quite difficult. We knew it was a girl, but identifying her was practically impossible, especially because she had no identity cards.
Colonel Bruno Aymar leads the investigation. The gendarmes are the military police who handle law enforcement in rural areas of France. He and his fellow investigators have little to go on beside the wrecked body. Somewhere hidden near these railroad tracks lie clues to this woman's identity. And possibly the key to her killer. Aymar soon finds the clue he needs: the woman's watch. The hands have stopped.
The hands on the watch were stopped at 4:10, but we couldn't tell whether it was 4:10 p.m. or 4:10 a.m.
But when Aymar removes the watch, it starts to work.
This meant that the fall must have stopped it.
The expensive watch tells investigators robbery was probably not a motive. Not much to go on, but all they have right now. The local press jumps on the story.
You have to realize that Chabanais is quite small. It is very isolated. So this incident immediately attracted the local press.
When the local newspaper files this story, Véronique Boutin, a French press agency reporter, runs with it.
It was like thunder. In a region where nothing much happens, you don't see things like this on the front page of the newspaper.
The story receives national attention, striking a wave of terror among the 50 million French citizens and tourists who depend on the train for safe passage each year. The killer has struck just as France plays host to more visitors than anywhere else in the world.
Unlike the United States, where everyone flies, in France we embrace the train. It's an image of childhood. There's a romance about the train that makes it part of the French culture.
With tourism at a record high, this anonymous victim could have come from anywhere. The medical examiner finds no evidence of sexual assault. He determines that she fell to her death from the speeding train, killed by the violent impact. A random victim or marked for death. Aymar can't say until he learns more about her. Though her watch has no monogram, it has a distinctive design. Aymar takes a shot in the dark that pays off.
We researched the watch, and we discovered that it was manufactured and sold only in Great Britain.
Aymar believes the victim may be English. To find out more will require help from the world's police force, Interpol. John Imhoff, former head of Interpol's National Central Bureau in Washington, D.C.
Interpol is a dedicated network that allows law enforcement officers to communicate worldwide instantaneously.
Almost 500 miles from Chabanais, in a small village in northern England.
Is missing. She didn't make
A mother and father report their daughter missing. "20-year-old Megan Thompson had gone to France to study law. But homesickness drew her back to England. She left for home the same day the body was found in Chabanais.
She should have arrived at Birmingham New Street Station, as she should have been met by her boyfriend.
Detective Diane Mon investigates the case. When Megan fails to show up, her boyfriend calls her family, and they contact police.
It was unclear initially whether she'd gone missing in France or in England.
To help find Megan, British police contact Interpol, which issues a yellow notice.
The yellow notice is the flag that this is a missing person. Here's somebody that we're desperately trying to find.
Colonel Aymar receives the notice 5 days after the discovery of the body by the tracks in Chabanais.
We were notified by the policeman of the Regional Crime Squad of Limoges that Interpol London had submitted to them a report about a missing person, a girl who had left Limoges and who had not arrived in England.
He notifies Interpol. The victim matched Megan Thompson's description. Days later, Megan's parents arrive in France. Colonel Aymar shows them the jewelry recovered from the body. The couple recognize their daughter's possessions, enabling authorities to officially identify the victim as Megan Thompson. Her body is so disfigured that police never show it to her parents. Megan was just 5 months shy of her 21st birthday. The positive identification rivets the public's attention.
When she was identified and we learned she was English, the French and English press reacted immediately. All the newspapers picked up the story, and the press took the case into their own hands. The pressure from the newspapers was so strong, especially from the English press.
The police retrace Megan's final hours. At the university in Limoges, France, Colonel Aymar questions the victim's roommates to find out when she left her apartment. Investigators learn Megan planned to take the night train from Limoges to Paris, where she would travel on to England. Aymar's next stop, Limoges Station. The ticket agent remembers seeing Megan, who paid cash for her ticket. Aymar learns the train left Limoges at 3:08 and passed by the Chabanais station at 4:10 a.m. without stopping. 4:10 a.m., the time frozen on Megan Thompson's watch when her body was discovered. Investigators now know the exact train Megan rode the night she died.
We seized the whole train, all the cars, and took it back to Limoges station to search for DNA traces or any clues in the car.
But police face a nagging inconsistency. The French National Rail System, the SNCF, tells investigators it is impossible for anyone to fall or be thrown from the train. All doors and windows automatically lock when the train accelerates to cruising speed. Even so, Amar feels certain that Megan Thompson had been on this train, and that somehow, someone had forced her off at high speed. Investigators find their proof. One car with the automatic locking feature disabled. Crime technicians scour the car, but cannot find any significant clues.
It had already been used again. The cars had been cleaned, so any evidence was wiped away.
But investigators will find their most valuable clues outside the train. Along the tracks, 10 kilometers north of where Megan Thompson's body was found, a hunter discovers a purse. Inside, a passport. Megan Thompson's passport. Police find her luggage farther down the track. The discovery supports Hamar's darkest suspicions. It proves that Megan Thompson had not fallen, had not thrown herself from the train.
We knew it was a murder because her belongings followed her off the train.
Not only had Megan Thompson been murdered, her killer roves free along the railways of Europe. A young student in France tries to get back to her family in England, and instead meets her death along the train tracks. The killer's still out there. Somewhere. Anywhere. Gendarmes launch an intensive manhunt for a faceless suspect. The French rail system cooperates, providing the names of passengers who purchased their tickets by credit card. But many passengers, including Megan Thompson, paid cash. Police also know that another group doesn't pay at all. The so-called train rats, who sneak aboard without tickets.
In this investigation, we became familiar with the underworld of night trains, and we realized a very shady crowd travels on these night trains. There are dropouts, hooligans who are looking to steal.
In many countries, passengers caught without tickets must either get off the train or buy a ticket on the spot. In France, passengers caught without tickets are cited and later issued a fine. Train inspectors do not force them off the train if they can show identification. To solve the Megan Thompson murder, French police, who generally don't ask for assistance from the press, make a public appeal for witnesses who might have seen the young student. Investigators also begin riding the train at the same time of night Megan Thompson would have been aboard. They interview passengers who regularly took the night train and might have seen something. Investigators question hundreds of witnesses. After almost 2 months, riding the rails pays off. One passenger recalls Megan speaking with a young man. Himar reconstructs a timeline of their trip.
She arrives at the Limoges station, and she withdraws 2,000 francs from the cash dispenser. Then, she goes to the ticket office, where she purchases a ticket to Paris. The ticket agent remembers this young lady very well.
Merci.
Then, at around 2 in the morning, she talks to another witness, who tells police that he remembers seeing Megan. A man wearing a cap stops to talk with her. He tells her that he is from Marseille and that he is traveling without a ticket. They get on the 17th car and sit side by side. The train pulls out at 3:08 a.m. Some time later, they leave the car and move to the next one. After Megan Thompson switches cars, no one sees her again. Based on the description of the man given by the witness, police create a computer-generated picture. Thousands of people come and go on the train, unnoticed. One of them is the killer, ready to strike again. And he could strike anywhere. Dijon, France, about 160 miles from Paris. On a chilly December night in 1999, the Calais-Ventimiglia train rattles through the city on its regularly scheduled route. On board, the train inspector notices a little boy sleeping alone in a compartment. He looks for the child's parents, sees no one. Before exiting the car, the inspector makes his routine check of the restroom, patrolling stowaways. He finds the body of a woman crumpled on the floor. Stab wounds perforate her body. She barely clings to life. In just 2 months, the French rail system has endured 2 murderous assaults. A murderer stalks the night trains in France. His first victim, a British student, her body found thrown by the side of the tracks. The second victim, a young woman, stabbed and left for dead in a bathroom. Police have a description of a suspect, but no names. Dijon Inspector Pierre-Marc Panazio leads the investigation.
It's unusual because it occurred at night. It took place in a train, a place where people should feel safe.
Dijon police cordon off the train to keep witnesses and a possible killer on board. Train authorities call the paramedics. but they can't save the victim.
We examined the body, an initial evaluation of the cause of death. The body was next to the restroom sink. What position were the feet in? How was the victim's body positioned? Were the arms folded? Were the arms stretched out? All those indications were noted. And this person had a purse. We opened it very carefully and discovered her ID.
Sylvie Bagot, from northern France. And police soon discover a child alone who was traveling with Sylvie Bagot.
This was very hard because he was just a child. We were not supposed to let him know that something terrible had happened, that his mother had died. So we needed to get some information from the child to be able to contact the victim's husband. I have 2 boys that were about the same age at the time of the events, so I tried to talk to him. I was expecting him to ask me, "Where is my mom?" I had trouble facing that question. That child touched me personally.
Believing the killer could still be on board, they hoped to flush him out. Although many of the passengers slept, some report seeing a passenger in a baseball cap, acting suspiciously.
He was very agitated, nervous. He moved around, he caused problems, he acted strangely.
Despite their thorough search, police can't find a passenger matching the description of the suspect. But in a nearby compartment, they discover hard evidence he had been there.
We found a baseball cap lying a short distance from the body. A blood-stained cap that we took away to analyze.
Then, police find evidence that the suspect fled the train.
We found a blood stain, a handprint on one of the doors in the car.
Police learned that the train makes a routine maintenance check in Dijon. The train stopped just 5 minutes before they discovered the body.
One person left the train after the maintenance stop when he wasn't supposed to. We established that he was a stowaway. He knew for sure that this train would make a maintenance stop at the Dijon station at that time.
The train inspector remembers the man. The official had discovered the stowaway and written him a citation.
When someone is traveling without a ticket, the train inspector asks for an ID to verify the person's identity. In this particular case, he presented a document identifying himself as Sid Ahmed Rezala. We had finally found a very promising suspect.
Dijon police learn that Sid Ahmed Rezala is a 20-year-old Algerian immigrant who has done time for raping a 14-year-old boy. and committing multiple counts of violent robbery. In his crimes, he often used a knife. He was released in June 1999, 4 months before the first train murder. Inspector Panazio issues a nationwide police bulletin, alerting French law enforcement agencies to find and apprehend Rezala. The bulletin reaches Colonel Bruno Aymar, still investigating the 2-month-old train murder of British University student Megan Thompson. Bourges investigators seize upon the similarities between the Dijon and the Chabanais murders. Though the violent manner of death differed, the parallels pointed to the same malicious killer. Both women rode the night trains. Sid Ahmed Rezala's mugshot resembled the computer-generated illustration. And one other striking similarity.
We suspected a man who several minutes earlier had been fined because he was traveling without a ticket. So we immediately made the connection.
The Bourges gendarmes call the police in Dijon.
When they found out about the picture, they contacted me to say, okay, we are interested because we already have something against this person from another homicide. Let's talk and try to cooperate.
The murders stir the press into frenzy. French police have to contend with both the murderer and constant media attention. The tradition of train travel in Europe and the region's dependence on the railway creates an unprecedented level of public interest.
The hardest thing for us in this investigation was the pressure. The pressure of the press, the pressure of our superiors. That kind of pressure is unbearable.
The investigators discover that since leaving prison, Rezala practically lived on the trains. Always on the move. Inspectors had fined him over 40 times for riding without a ticket.
This is unique. It's a stalker case. A person who lives by night takes advantage of the situation. Because during the night, there are fewer witnesses. It's easier to hide, to escape, to use the darkness to disguise oneself. I'm sure the same crime could not have been committed at 4 p.m. It's impossible.
A killer stalks the railways of France, relying on darkness as his ally, striking, then vanishing into the night. Police believe they know his name, and they are certain he will kill again. French authorities in Bourges and Dijon have joined forces to stop a killer on the French rail system. The suspect, 20-year-old ex-con Sid Ahmed Rezala. An expert stowaway, he'll be nearly impossible to track down. But Dijon Police Inspector Pierre-Marc Panazio has a plan. To get to Rezala, he'll identify everyone who he had visited while in jail.
We had his parents' address in Marseille, his girlfriend's address in Amiens, which turned out to be something critical.
A man on the run will seek places where he has allies. Police begin surveillance on both his family's home in Marseille and his girlfriend's apartment in Amiens. When the press learn police have a suspect, they demand to know the name of the man they've dubbed the Railway Ripper.
The magistrate gave a press conference in Dijon saying he didn't want to identify the suspect by name because they were concerned he would escape. But someone leaked it.
One journalist, defying authorities, calls on Rezala's family, tipping off Rezala that he's the prime suspect in the hunt for the railway ripper.
Monsieur Rezala.
Moi-même.
Non, Sid Ahmed Rezala.
Il n'est pas là, il a quitté, vous l'avez manqué.
The magistrate's worst fears are realized. When Marseille police arrive, Rezala has already fled. Knowing he's wanted, a violent, unstable criminal like Rezala can act in two ways. He could vanish, or he could kill again.
For us, this caused a lot of problems. The suspect was agitated. He panicked and he ran.
Rezala retreats to the world he knows best, the night trains.
We never stopped worrying that he could hurt another victim.
As the information about Rezala becomes public, hundreds of phone calls pour in.
The public was passionate about this investigation because it involved the train, because it involved a young woman, because a child had lost his mother. That made people upset.
Police investigate real and imagined Rezala sightings in Paris, Amiens, and Dijon.
People didn't just see him in the trains. They'd see him at gas stations. They would see him in town. Things like that.
To the public, it seems the railway ripper is everywhere. But to the police, he is nowhere to be found. Tracking Rezala's movements north of Paris to Amiens, Inspector Panazio meets with some of Rezala's friends.
To have these conversations with young women, we had to win their trust. We had to convince them that he was a very dangerous person, that there could be more victims.
Panazio persuades them to reveal crucial information. He learns that Rezala rents a room in an apartment building in Amiens. They're too late. They find an empty apartment, or so it appears. They search the entire building, ending up in the basement.
When we searched in Amiens, we were looking for a living person, a fugitive. Then, we discovered something in the basement, under a pile of coal. The body of a young woman.
Investigators have found another victim. But they are no closer to capturing Rezala. In France, authorities stage a nationwide manhunt for 20-year-old Sid Ahmed Rezala, suspected of murdering 2 young women on France's national rail system. In the basement of a building in Amiens, where Rezala hides out, police uncover the body of a 3rd victim. 20-year-old Renée Vasse, missing for 2 months. The report was filed over 2 weeks after Rezala's first victim, Megan Thompson, was found dead. Vasse has been strangled. Suspecting that Rezala may have fled the country, French authorities contact Interpol. the international crime-fighting organization issues a red notice for Sid Ahmed Rezala.
A red notice is a wanted notice, a poster, if you will, that is promulgated internationally as opposed to just within the bounds of a single country.
Now, an already sensational story reaches fever pitch.
It was in the papers. Everyone knew his face. Everyone knew the story of the British woman, the victim in Dijon and the one in Amiens. All the details were known. That created a certain panic in the night trains.
The entire nation of France wonders when and where the railway ripper will strike next. Police struggle to keep the lines of communication open between departments without feeding the rumor mill on the streets. Success demands flawless cooperation. Local, regional, and national police team up to catch the railway ripper. Each has its own methodology and its own set of cases to solve. But Rezala takes top priority. The magistrate grants the police permission to trace and record phone conversations of people they believe he may contact. Inspector Panazio manages to turn one of the suspect's old friends into an ally.
Allô?
We had earned her trust, and very bravely, this person chose to inform me.
It started with a puzzling phone call in a language she didn't understand, from a number she didn't recognize. But it was the break investigators were looking for.
She did not understand why they were talking to her in Portuguese, and she decided to give me that number, saying, "It's weird, it's strange, I don't know this number. They speak a foreign language. Can you check it?"
If Rezala placed the suspicious call, then it means he's fled the country and is now in Portugal. French authorities contact Interpol's National Central Bureau, headquartered in Lisbon, Portugal.
We received the information here at Interpol. We knew right away the case was very serious.
Dr. Luis Neves is head of Interpol's National Central Bureau and the coordinator of investigations for the Portuguese Ministry of Justice. Now he must pick up the trail of the killer in Lisbon.
We knew what he had done and that he was a very dangerous man, and we knew he could escape.
French police traced the call that Rezala's friend had received. It originated from a phone booth in the town of Baixa de Banheira, 12 miles from Lisbon. Law enforcement agencies in Portugal find the booth and verify the information on the caller ID. Now, they can zero in on their suspect.
We communicated with the French via Interpol to tell them that the place really existed and that their information was good.
French investigators fly to Portugal to join their colleagues. John Imhoff and others depend on this crucial level of cooperation.
It's important for Interpol to be a partner in these investigations and to bridge communication gaps. The person who brought the matter to Interpol should take credit for the achievement because they had the good sense to go that way.
We immediately went to Baixa de Banheira. We brought in many criminal investigators and spread out to try to find Rezala.
Within hours of staking out the phone booth, Lisbon detectives spot a man fitting Rezala's description, heading into a post office. They tail him. This case, of international proportions, hinges on what happens next. Lisbon police calculate the right moment to take him down. Any slip, and Rezala could disappear. And when they strike fast.
Sid Ahmed Rezala.
French detectives confirm that the man in custody is the railway ripper, Sid Ahmed Rezala.
Rezala was very surprised. He never suspected he would be arrested here.
While France prepares extradition proceedings, Rezala stays imprisoned in Portugal. With his capture, the French authorities must now build their case against him. They hire Rémi Julien, a movie special effects designer, to recreate Megan Thompson's brutal death. With mannequins, they reconstruct her terrifying last moments, being thrown from a speeding train at Chabanais.
We positioned the mannequin on the window. And the mannequin fell practically at the same place where the body had been found. All the elements of the crime matched our reconstruction. We knew the way he had done it, that he had thrown her by toppling her over the window.
4 months after Rezala's arrest, a French magazine publishes an interview with Rezala in a Portuguese prison. In the article, Rezala confesses to the murders of all 3 women. He claims to have experienced flashes of light that triggered him to kill.
Why did he kill? This is not just my opinion, but also what the psychologists think. He was in his own world, in a bubble, and then everything external stopped mattering. The only thing that mattered was being rejected. He felt very bad being rejected by a man or a woman, and in that moment, he would turn into another person, a very dangerous one.
Then, 1 month after his confession, Rezala kills one last time. Inside a Portuguese prison, just a few weeks before going back to France to stand trial, he sets his mattress on fire. Within minutes, he dies of smoke inhalation.
If Rezala had not died, he would have been sent to France maybe 10 or 15 days later. That was what scared him the most, having to go back to jail in France again.
But now, as suddenly as it began, it was over. For the killer and for the families of the victims. At the home of Rezala's first victim, the news of his death comes as a shock. Detective Constable Diane Mon assisted Megan Thompson's family through their ordeal.
On the one hand, a satisfactory trial and result of trial brings some finality for the family. But on the other hand, the fact that they didn't have to suffer a trial, they didn't have to go through the trauma of that trial, was again a relief.
Inspector Panazio and his colleagues from Dijon gain valuable knowledge by working with the police in different Interpol member countries.
This small case touched Portugal, touched Great Britain, and in some way that brought us closer. It was a terrible case. Above all, these people did not deserve what happened to them. You feel quite helpless when faced with these acts, but we cannot prevent everything.
The overwhelming publicity surrounding the case focuses the public's attention on train safety. The French National Railroad improves security on the night route, re-establishing confidence in the venerable railways. Megan Thompson's family makes certain that their daughter's tragic death will contribute to the awareness. They donate money given in their daughter's name to the Susie Lamplugh Trust, a foundation that helps to educate young men and women about protecting themselves as they travel the continent of Europe. Bedford County, Virginia. On April 3rd, 1985, Deputy Ricky Gardner drives back to the Bedford County Sheriff's Office. Just after 4 p.m., a call comes over the radio.
It's a Gardner, 10-4.
The Bedford County Sheriff's Office received a call from a group of ladies who had gone to the residence of Derek and Nancy Haysom for a bridge game.
The women didn't get an answer when they knocked on the door.
Our deputies had been sent to the residence for a well-being check.
Gardner notices something strange about the call.
They didn't come back on the radio.
The officers call in their report on the telephone so they can't be overheard. This procedure is only used in the most serious situations. For Detective Gardner, it is an ominous sign.
So I knew then, I said, well, that doesn't sound exactly right. So I started listening a little bit more intently.
The dispatcher orders all units to respond to the Haysom home immediately. Derek and Nancy Haysom live in a modest house in an expensive part of town. Crime scene investigators are already on the scene when Gardner arrives.
When I entered the residence, I observed a male subject laying on the floor to the left of the front door as you go in, laying in a large pool of dried blood.
Derek Haysom's throat has been slit. He's been stabbed dozens of times. From the condition of the body, it looks like he's been dead for several days. Deputy Gardner follows a trail of dried blood into the kitchen. There he finds Nancy Haysom's body.
There was a large amount of blood, dried blood, surrounding her body as well.
Like her husband, Mrs. Haysom's throat has been cut. She too has been stabbed repeatedly.
I had only been an investigator for about 6 months. So this was the first murder scene that I had ever been assigned to. It was obvious to a young investigator that it was a very violent crime and that the victims obviously put up a fight.
Gardner questions the women who first found the bodies. They tell him they played bridge with Derek Haysom regularly. Derek was religious about his weekly bridge game. He never missed it. When he didn't answer the door that afternoon, they became concerned. To Gardner, nothing about the murders makes sense. They seem random. He questions the Haysoms' neighbors, hoping they might have seen something.
We didn't have a lot of luck in the neighborhood because it is such a remote area, and people could go and come over there without really being detected.
Despite the violence of the crime and the obvious signs of a struggle, no one has seen or heard anything unusual. News of the murder leaks to the press. Terrence Samuel covered it for the Roanoke Times.
We can't believe this has happened here, you know. There are these 2 dead people. It's pretty brutal. There's blood everywhere. You know, reporters are desperate for any kind of information, you know, where they're kind of milking everybody who comes and leaves, and there's a sense that this is something big.
Forensic techs from the Bedford County Sheriff's Department analyze every corner of the house. There is no sign of forced entry. Nancy Hasem's purse, in plain view, is still full of cash.
Right out of the chute, we were able to eliminate the robbery as being a motive. So we were trying to figure out why were these two people so brutally murdered.
Check this out. What do you think?
In the dining room, investigators find a bloody handprint on the upholstery of a chair. Does it belong to one of the Hasems, or did the killer leave it behind? Investigators bag the upholstery and the handprint as evidence. Forensic techs seal every door and window in the house, then fumigate the interior with superglue. Cyanoacrylate, an ingredient in superglue, clings to latent fingerprints, making them visible. Next, using luminol, investigators search the house for any hidden blood evidence. Under a specialized light source, blood trails emerge in the dark. Gardner notices strange patterns. It almost looks as if the killer mopped the floor with it. Whoever committed this crime spent time in the home trying to cover his or her tracks, though unsuccessfully. Bloody footprints lead away from Derek's body.
One appeared to be made from a tennis shoe. At least 2 or 3 others were either partial barefoot impressions or one complete barefoot impression.
The trail of prints leads down the hall, into the bedroom, and ends in the master bath. Gardner wonders if the killer tried to clean himself up before he left the house.
We sprayed the showers, the sinks, and also the area outside of the front door.
Blood is everywhere. Whoever killed the Hasems also washed up in their bathroom.
We'd never seen anything like this before. We really hadn't formulated any kind of an idea on what really happened inside the residence or how many people, how many perpetrators had been there. Emotionally, it was just draining to be involved in something like that, but yet at the same time, the adrenaline was still flowing. I knew that this was going to be a very important case.
After spending hours analyzing the crime scene, all Deputy Gardner uncovers are more questions. He has mountains of evidence to analyze, limited resources, and no real leads.
We were collecting evidence and sending it off to the lab and hoping that the lab would give us some idea on what we really had.
As the Virginia State Crime Lab in Richmond analyzes the evidence, the Bedford County Sheriff's Department activates the Regional Homicide Squad. Detectives from all over the state study the crime scene photos. Investigators now wonder if the double homicide is a ritual cult killing.
There were drawings in the blood in the house that seemed to suggest some kind of cultish connection. There was absolute confusion and like, who could have done this? Why would they have done this? Is something in this community completely broken down?
The media had just focused in on this, and the pressure from the community was becoming pretty intense.
With no suspects and no motive, the residents of Bedford County now fear their community is being stalked by cult killers. Where will they strike next? And who will they target? Bedford County, Virginia. A brutal double homicide terrifies residents of this small community. At the crime scene, investigators find a bizarre clue. It seems that whoever killed Derek and Nancy Hasem may have drawn pictures in their blood. Deputy Ricky Gardner wonders if he is dealing with a cult killer. On Easter Sunday, Gardner attends a memorial service for the victims, along with their family and friends. Derek Haysom was a retired executive. He had managed steel mills in Africa and Canada. In 1959, he met and married Nancy.
Nancy Haysom grew up in Virginia. Her father was a geologist of some kind. He moved to Africa for his work. At some point, she meets a man much older, Derek Haysom. They get married. They have one kid, Elizabeth Haysom.
Derek had 3 children from a previous marriage, and Nancy had 2. To Gardner, the Haysoms seemed like the perfect blended family. Elizabeth attends the University of Virginia, where she is an Eccles Scholar. Her half-brothers are all professionals. James works as an engineer in Canada. Walter practices medicine in Texas. Ronald is an architect, and Victor practices law in Nova Scotia.
They had traveled all over the world, lived all over the world, and in fact their children still at that time were living all over the world in different countries and were scattered across the country. So we knew we had a job cut out for us to try to put the pieces of the puzzle together, because it was, early on, it was becoming a very complicated case.
Desperate for leads, investigators talked to the people who knew the victims best, their children.
The weekend of the memorial service, the siblings came to Lynchburg, obviously, to attend their parents' memorial service. So we were able to talk to the sons and the daughters and try to put together some idea of, their history.
Walter Haysom tells investigators he was in Texas at the time of the murders.
The son was very cooperative and became sort of the liaison between the sheriff's office, the investigators, and the family members.
Investigators talked to all 6 Haysom children, including the youngest, 21-year-old Elizabeth.
She loved her parents, and she couldn't understand why anybody would murder them.
Elizabeth tells Deputy Gardner she was out of town the weekend her parents were killed.
She and her boyfriend had gone to Washington, D.C. the weekend of March the 30th. In fact, they had rented a car in Charlottesville, Virginia on Friday the 29th of March and had driven to Washington, D.C. and spent the weekend in the Washington area touring and visiting sites.
That afternoon, they went to a movie. After they returned to the hotel, Elizabeth said she ordered dinner from room service. Elizabeth and her boyfriend Jens returned to Charlottesville on Sunday night to get ready for classes on Monday. On Wednesday, she learned her parents had been killed. Gardner asks Elizabeth if her parents had any enemies. She tells him that before her father retired, he had been at the center of an intense labor dispute.
Mr. Haysom had been involved in the unions up in Nova Scotia. We were told that he had made some people mad, had stood up to the union, and there was some controversy there.
Elizabeth also mentioned that one of her half-brothers had been engaged to a woman with a history of emotional problems. He jilted her and married somebody else.
She said, y'all really need to look at her. She's psychotic. She could have killed my parents, so y'all really need to look at her.
Gardner first checks out Elizabeth's story. Credit card receipts confirm she rented a car in Charlottesville, Virginia on March 29th. And her boyfriend paid for a hotel room in Washington, D.C. that night. Elizabeth has a solid alibi, as do her siblings. Gardner interviews the young local woman Elizabeth mentioned in her interview. the woman had been engaged to Elizabeth's half-brother. Her answers in the interview troubled Gardner.
Her behavior was bizarre. We didn't know if she was some kind of a sociopath. She would make statements as to, you know, the victims and the families or whatnot, and it was just bizarre.
But not bizarre enough to make her a murderer. The ex-fiancé is eliminated as a suspect when her foot impression does not match those taken at the scene. Gardner reviews Elizabeth's statement, looking for anything he might have missed. Then, he makes a startling discovery.
And we began looking at the rental car agreement, and we saw that the mileage was a whole lot more than it should have been if, in fact, they had driven from Charlottesville to Washington.
Gardner calculates that the round trip from Charlottesville, Virginia to Washington, D.C. is about 230 miles.
The rental car agreement showed that they had traveled some 669 miles that weekend.
Gardner again questions Elizabeth, this time about the mileage on her rental car. She explains that she and her boyfriend did a lot of sightseeing in Washington, D.C.
And they went here and they got lost. They ended up in Maryland. So I told her, I said, well, we need to collect some evidence from you. We need to get your fingerprints, we need to get your blood type, and we need your anatomical foot impressions to compare with what we found at the scene. How do you feel about doing that? And she said, I'll do anything you want me to do. It's not a problem. So a couple of days later, I traveled to Charlottesville and fingerprinted her. Got a vial of her blood, inked the bottom of her feet, and got her to walk across a piece of paper. She was cooperating with our investigation.
In the lab, Elizabeth Haysom's fingerprints and blood are compared to samples collected at the crime scene. Her fingerprints match prints found in the home, but that is to be expected. Her blood type does not match the blood found in the bathroom. Her footprint is inconsistent with the bloody footprints found at the scene. From the physical evidence, Gardner concludes that Elizabeth did not murder her parents.
About this period of time is when we started asking about her boyfriend.
Gardner recalls that Elizabeth's boyfriend, Jens Soring, had a bandage on his hand at the Haysoms' memorial service. He decides to ask Jens a few questions. Jens Soring is 19 years old, the son of a German diplomat working in the United States.
He wanted to convince us that he was smarter than anybody else, highly intelligent. He dared us for even talking to him about being a suspect.
Gardner questions Jens about the extra mileage on the rental car the weekend he and Elizabeth drove to Washington. Jens corroborates Elizabeth's story. They got lost and drove around Washington for hours.
And I remember making the statement to him, well, you were major lost because you put 400 more miles on the car than it should have been.
Jens sticks to his story. Deputy Gardner asks him to provide the same samples Elizabeth did: blood, fingerprints, and footprints. Jens says he would like to cooperate, but he can't.
He was afraid that his father was going to be deported out of the country because his son, Jens, was a murder suspect.
Gardner reassures the young student he only needs samples to eliminate him as a suspect. Jens tells Gardner he is too busy with upcoming exams.
At the time, he was one of the few people if not the only person that we had confronted about collecting physical evidence and not received any cooperation.
Jens finally agrees to return to Bedford on October 16th to provide prints and blood samples. But on October 15th, Deputy Gardner receives a stunning phone call. It's Walter Haysom. He flew in from Texas to visit Elizabeth.
Well, when he called the apartment, her roommate answered the phone, and he asked to speak to Elizabeth. And the roommate said, well, she's not here. And the brother said, well, when do you expect her back? And she says, I don't. And he says, what do you mean, you don't? And she said, well, she doesn't live here anymore, she's gone. Matter of fact, when she left you a letter, and also Soring left the investigators a letter. And he said, what do you mean Soring left letters? Well, he's gone too.
Gardner can't believe it. The only two suspects in the brutal murder case have fled.
And I drove to Lynchburg, picked up the brother, and flew to Charlottesville. Elizabeth had gone, Jens had gone, and we're going, I think we're on the right track now, because they have obviously absconded. The brother that night was very upset with us and our prosecutor because he thought that we had let the murderers get away.
But without hard evidence pointing to murder, police can't arrest the suspects.
We went over the facts of the case, trying to convince the brother that we did not have enough probable cause to arrest either one of them.
Yes?
At the apartment, Deputy Gardner talks to the roommate. She hands over the letters from Elizabeth and Jens. Elizabeth's letter to her family says she and Jens left for an unspecified destination. She urges them not to try to find her. Jens also left a letter. It's addressed to Deputy Gardner.
Jens left a letter basically saying that he did not commit the crimes against the Haysoms, did not murder the Haysoms, and that they had decided to start a life on their own, he and Elizabeth, and that he regretted the fact that Elizabeth had supplied us with any physical evidence.
Gardner is no longer looking at a random Colt killing. He suspects the brutal double homicide was carefully planned. 21-year-old Elizabeth Haysom and 19-year-old Jens Soring are now the prime suspects. With credit cards and a head start, by now they could be anywhere in the world. Now Deputy Gardner's only hope of finding them is Interpol. In Virginia, Derek and Nancy Haysom are brutally murdered, stabbed to death in their own home.
There's a sense that, okay, whoever did it, wherever they've gone, they're not going to get far. Turned out not to be the case.
As the investigation heats up, the couple's daughter Elizabeth suddenly disappears, along with her boyfriend, Jens Soring. Deputy Ricky Gardner of the Bedford County Sheriff's Department fears he may have lost his suspects and that they may have gotten away with murder. 2 days later, investigators confirm their worst fears.
Jens's car was located in a parking garage at the airport, and at that time we had strong feelings that they had left the country. I contacted Interpol office in Washington, D.C. to alert them that these two were suspects in the murders of her parents.
But investigators in the United States don't have enough evidence to charge Elizabeth Haysom and Jens Soring yet.
The only thing we had was the mileage and the fact that they absconded. That wasn't enough to convict them in court of double homicide.
John Imhoff is the former director of the U.S. Interpol office.
Unfortunately, Ricky doesn't have sufficient information for a red notice. Had he had just a little bit more time, he could have developed the case so that he could have collected forensic evidence about Jens Soering to allow him to have the arrest warrant issued.
It is yet another blow to the investigation. If Gardner hopes to make a case against the fugitives, he needs more than circumstantial evidence. He needs to establish a motive for murder. According to Elizabeth, she adored her parents. They doted on her and sent her to an exclusive British boarding school.
We did.
But according to family members, Elizabeth ran away just before graduation.
We found out that Elizabeth was prim and proper, as she led us on to be in the initial interview. We learned that, in fact, that she had experimented with a number of types of drugs, heroin, LSD.
She gets in trouble. She takes off at some point, drops out.
Elizabeth left Wickham Abbey with a friend. In Virginia, Derek and Nancy Haysom did everything they could to find their daughter. But Elizabeth had vanished. Months later, both girls appeared at the British consulate in Berlin.
She was in a pretty bad situation, strung out, basically living in poverty. So, we found out that Elizabeth was a bizarre character. The fact that she did all these things did not make her a murderer or a murder suspect, but it was inconsistent with the Elizabeth that we talked to in the initial interview.
Elizabeth's parents arranged for her to return to the United States.
We were seeing two sides of Elizabeth there. The pure and the proper, the Wickham Abbey Elizabeth Haysom, and then the drug addict Elizabeth. So, which one were we dealing with there?
In the fall of 1984, Derek and Nancy Haysom enrolled Elizabeth at the University of Virginia. She was even awarded a prestigious scholarship. But Elizabeth was still a troubled young woman. She resented her parents for controlling her life. Deputy Gardner wonders how deep that resentment went and how Jens figures into the equation.
Really?
Yeah.
He questions students at the University of Virginia to learn more. Shortly after Elizabeth entered UVA, she attended a party for scholarship students. There, she met Jens Soering. He was the son of a German diplomat. Like Elizabeth, he had grown up all over the world.
He had always been a bookworm, a nerd. And when he met Elizabeth Haysom in the fall of '84, he had never had a romantic relationship before that. And she was older, worldly, with the European accent. He was absolutely smitten. He fell in love with her. I mean, head over heels in love with her.
Elizabeth and Jens were inseparable. They lived in a world of their own. Derek and Nancy Haysom were as opinionated about their daughter's relationship as they were about her education. They were against it. They rejected Jens outright.
They didn't approve of him. He wasn't good enough for their daughter.
Gardner feels he has finally found a possible motive for the Haysom murder. If he is right, then two brutal killers are free somewhere in the world. In Bedford County, Virginia, a small-town cop suspects two college students are responsible for a brutal double murder. Jens Soering has fled the country, flying to Europe. His girlfriend, Elizabeth Haysom, leaves the country on a different flight. Deputy Ricky Gardner of the Bedford County Sheriff's Office contacts Interpol to help track down the fugitives.
Hopefully, if Jens and Elizabeth were arrested, stopped somewhere overseas, their names would pop up in Interpol files, and they would know to contact us in Bedford County.
In Europe, Jens and Elizabeth alter their passports, creating false identities to elude authorities. The fake passports work perfectly. They easily travel to Paris, then on to Brussels and Luxembourg by train. In Luxembourg, the couple rents a car and drives to Bern, Switzerland.
A fugitive really has a choice of anywhere in the world to hide. And Ricky Gardner has a difficult situation with Jens Suring and Elizabeth Haysom on the run. He knows they have great facility for traveling internationally.
From Switzerland, the fugitives drive to Bulgaria and finally into Serbia and Montenegro, then known as Yugoslavia. While in the mountains, Elizabeth loses control of the car. Both Elizabeth and Jens are injured in the crash, but they can't afford to wait around for the police. It is too risky. The fugitives abandon the wrecked car and board a train to Belgrade. From there, they take another train and flee to Austria. In Vienna, they run out of money. Elizabeth is forced to make a cash withdrawal on a credit card in her own name.
In the modern world, credit card transactions are recorded instantaneously. In 1985, you're 4 or 5 days from having feedback from a specific credit card transaction.
To throw authorities off their trail, Elizabeth leaves a letter addressed to one of her friends with a hotel clerk in Salzburg. She tells him to wait a few days before he mails it. In the letter, Elizabeth claims she and Jens are continuing their travels in Europe. In reality, the couple flies to Bangkok, Thailand. Unable to find work, their credit cards maxed out, they come up with a new scheme to get money. First, they create several sets of false identification using local photographers and print shops.
A sophisticated, a savvy kid traveling through Southeast Asia would not have great difficulty in finding somebody willing to prepare false travel documentation for them. I would suspect that Jens Suring, being the son of a diplomat, was probably more aware of how easy this was.
They use the fake IDs to purchase traveler's checks. They later report the checks as stolen and receive cash refunds. On January 8th, Elizabeth and Jens return to England. They quickly learn their traveler's check scheme won't work. In the UK, the checks are too carefully scrutinized. So they devise a new scheme. Using their forged IDs, Jens and Elizabeth open accounts at different banks all over London. They use counterchecks and fake IDs to make purchases at upscale department stores, and later return the items for cash. The new scheme works. Back in Virginia, Deputy Ricky Gardner and the Bedford County Sheriff's Office worked day and night trying to find the fugitives.
And I'd worked on this case for about 17 or 18 months. And I'd played out every possible scenario in my mind about what had happened. Everywhere you go, people talking about it, asking you about it, living it.
And they're frustrated. They're frustrated for months and months and months.
Terrence Samuel is a reporter for the Roanoke Times covering the ongoing investigation.
They don't know where they are, number one, and number two, they don't know what to do once they get them, because they basically don't think they have any evidence beyond the fact that, they fled.
For 7 long months, the young couple eludes authorities. But in May 1986, they make a crucial mistake.
They're in London. They're running their check fraud, going into department stores, buying stuff with a check, returning it for cash at a different store.
Jens and Elizabeth look sophisticated. They are very well dressed. But a security guard in a Richmond, London clothing store notices something strange. Although they arrive at the store together, they pretend they don't know each other. They are detained for questioning. Detective Constable Terry Wright questions the couple at a police station nearby.
They had ID cards, and they were from Canada. The names that they gave at the time were Christopher Platt No and Tara Lucy No.
Wright has no way of knowing who he has in custody.
These two young people, they just appeared to be young travelers, young students.
The couple claims they have done nothing wrong. They even allow police to search their flat. Inside the flat, Wright finds bag after bag of new merchandise. Each one has a valid department store receipt. But a thorough search of the room turns up personal letters, journals, several passports, and a stack of checkbooks. Each account is with a different bank and under a different name. Terry Wright plows through the couple's papers, looking for evidence of check fraud.
We found genuine passports. So, of course, now we realised that this guy was actually Jan Søring and that she was Elizabeth Haysom. At this point, these names didn't mean anything to us.
Still, the more Wright reads, the more uneasy he becomes. The couple's letters and journals suggest they are on the run. Detective Wright wants to know why. 2 young murder suspects flee across Europe and Asia. They use fake IDs to slip across borders at will. Deputy Ricky Gardner of the Bedford County, Virginia Sheriff's Department works closely with Interpol. He has to find Jens Søring and Elizabeth Haysom to bring them to justice. In England, Constable Terry Wright arrests the couple for fraud. But he firmly believes there is more to Jens Søring and Elizabeth Haysom than meets the eye.
It seemed to me that they did have something to hide and that it was obviously something serious. And I was telling people that I thought they'd done a murder, even though they didn't refer to murder, death or anything. And everybody sort of said, yeah, okay, well, carry on. And I carried on and I went through everything.
He checks to see if they are wanted in other countries.
I asked Interpol if they would circulate all of the details to see if they were wanted anywhere. I sent them a list of all of their false identities, which amounted to about 15 in total. Details of their genuine identities from their passports, and asked them if they would send these details across the various different countries.
Using the diaries, Interpol retraces the couple's travels. They send the information to the United States and to the countries they traveled through in Europe and into Thailand.
When I got into work one morning, there was a teleprinter message waiting for me which had come through Interpol.
Interpol confirms Wright's suspicions. Jens and Elizabeth not only pass bad checks, they're suspected murderers.
They now knew that I'd arrested, or that we had arrested, Jan Søring and Elizabeth Haysom, and they were trying to make contact so that they could let me know that they were strongly suspected of the murder of Derek and Nancy Haysom. The officers that were trying to get hold of me were from Bedford County Sheriff's Department in the United States, and the officer in particular was an investigator called Ricky Gardner.
Investigator Gardner?
Yes, hello. My name's Terry Wright. I'm a detective with the Metropolitan Police in London, in England.
And I'm almost speechless to today because that was a very emotional telephone conversation, because I had lived this case for like 14 months. And for somebody to call me on the phone and say that they had those two in jail and had evidence that they committed a crime, and it was almost too good to be true.
Wright warns Deputy Gardner they must move quickly. In England, the two students are only charged with check fraud.
There was a possibility that they could get bail. If they got bail, we'd probably never see them again. They'd probably be able to get hold of further false IDs and just disappear.
5 days later, Gardner flies to England. The entire case is at stake. They may never have this chance again. Once again, Elizabeth Haysom finds herself facing Deputy Ricky Gardner. This time, she tells him the truth.
Elizabeth talked a great deal about her hatred for her parents and resentment. And they absolutely controlled her life when she was in Lynchburg and decided who she could date and who she couldn't date. And I think she just got tired of it. She convinced Jens that he was in her future, but first he had to get rid of her parents. And he was willing to do that. She planted the seed in his mind, and he was willing to let it grow.
As in her previous statements, Elizabeth tells Gardner she and Jens drove from Charlottesville, Virginia to Washington, D.C., where they checked into a hotel. But now she claims Jens didn't go to the movies. Instead, he dropped her off at the movie theater and told her to buy 2 tickets to establish an alibi. Jens then drove to the Haysoms' home in Boonesboro, Virginia.
She put the idea in his head, and when he left Washington that day, he had 4 hours to change his mind, and he didn't. He did it. He went there and did exactly what he had planned to do if they didn't accept him into Elizabeth's life. And that was to murder him.
Hours later, Jens returned to the theater. He was covered with blood. He told her he had dealt with her parents once and for all. They were finally free to live their lives together.
She was shocked that he'd actually gone through with it.
She made the statement to me that things changed the night that Jens murdered her parents, because they controlled and ruled her life up until that point. But after he murdered her parents and picked her up and they got back to the Marriott that night, roles switched and he became the dominating and controlling person in her life. So she lost her parents, but she gained Jens, and he just took their place.
Elizabeth Haysom is extradited to the United States to stand trial. In August 1987, she tells a jury what Jens told her the night he returned from Charlottesville.
He said he got to the residence after dropping Elizabeth off in Georgetown.
Yes, I didn't accept. Want to talk to Come in.
They invited him in and offered him something to eat because they were just finishing up dinner themselves.
Jens brought up the topic of his relationship with Elizabeth.
He says, you know, I love your daughter, and I'm asking you for your permission to date her and possibly get married sometime. And Mr. Haysom was adamantly opposed to that. And he says, no, son. He says, you're not good enough for our daughter. I'm powerful enough to have you kicked out of the country. I'll have you kicked out of the university. And that's when Jens went and tackled him and took him down and cut his throat.
Jens then attacks Nancy Haysom. Investigators are now certain Jens Soring is responsible for the brutal stabbing deaths of Derek and Nancy Haysom. In August 1989, Jens Soring is extradited back to Virginia. At trial, he tries to pin the murders on Elizabeth. According to Jens's testimony, he was the one who set up the alibi. She was the one who killed her own parents. Forensic evidence collected at the crime scene tells a much different story. Jens's foot impression matches a bloody sock print found inside the Haysom home. His blood, type O, was also found in the Haysom's bathroom. In 1987, Elizabeth Haysom is found guilty of accessory to murder. She is sentenced to 90 years. In 1990, Jens Soring is found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Due to an agreement with the British government, U.S. prosecutors do not seek the death penalty. Instead, Jens Soring is sentenced to spend the rest of his life in a Virginia prison. The couple who killed to stay together will spend the rest of their lives separated by iron bars.